Hi there. I'm coming on to say it is day 24 since our mom.
What if the name you've built your entire career on isn't the only name that defines you? What if somewhere, hidden in the quiet corners of family history, there's a story that changes everything you thought you knew? That's exactly the kind of revelation that has people across the country stopping mid-scroll, leaning in closer, and asking one question out loud: who is Nancy Guthrie? And what does she have to do with Savannah Guthrie's story? Savannah Guthrie, a name synonymous with morning television royalty. The woman who greets millions of Americans every single day from behind the Today Show desk. Composed, warm, unshakable. She's covered presidents, broken news, and held the line on live television through moments that would rattle anyone. She is, by every measure, a titan of broadcast journalism. But here's what very few people have been talking about, and what fewer still have fully connected. There's another Guthrie in this story. A woman whose life, whose faith, whose quiet resilience runs in a parallel thread to Savannah's own journey. And when those threads finally cross, the story that emerges is not what anyone expected. This isn't gossip. This isn't tabloid noise. This is a deeply human story about family, identity, faith, loss, and the invisible forces that shape who we become. By the time this documentary reaches its final frame, you'll understand why this revelation isn't just stunning, it's beautiful. Stay with us. To understand why this story matters, you have to go back. Not to a newsroom, not to a red carpet or a ratings board. You have to go back to the kind of American life that doesn't make headlines. The kind lived quietly, faithfully, in small moments and big choices that nobody films and nobody applauds. Savannah Guthrie was born on December 27, 1971, in Melbourne, Australia, while her father was working abroad. The family eventually settled in Tucson, Arizona, and it was there, in the warm desert air of the American Southwest, that Savannah began to become who she is. Her father, Charles Guthrie, passed away when she was just a teenager, a loss that would quietly reshape the architecture of her inner world in ways she wouldn't fully articulate until decades later. She was not handed her career on a silver platter. She worked for it with a ferocity that is almost difficult to comprehend. She earned a law degree from Georgetown University Law Center. She practiced law. She transitioned into journalism not as an escape, but as a calling, a deep, urgent need to communicate, to witness, to tell the truth about the world as she saw it. She climbed every rung of that ladder with her hands, not with connections, not with shortcuts. By the time she reached the Today Show desk, first as a correspondent, then as co-anchor alongside Matt Lauer, and later alongside Hoda Kotb, she had already logged years of extraordinary work. She covered the Supreme Court. She reported from war zones and political trenches. She stood in front of cameras in moments of national grief and national triumph. And she never flinched. But here's the thing about people who project that kind of strength. The ones who never flinch on camera. They carry things. They carry the weight of losses they don't talk about, fears they don't display, questions about identity and belonging that don't fit neatly into a morning show segment. And one of those quiet, carried things, one of those threads, running beneath the surface of Savannah Guthrie's remarkably public life, connects to a woman named Nancy Guthrie. Nancy is not a household name the way Savannah is. She doesn't anchor a morning show watched by millions. She doesn't appear on magazine covers or walk red carpets. But she has stood in front of audiences and spoken words that have cracked hearts wide open and stitched them back together. She is an author, a speaker, a Bible teacher, and she has done all of this while walking through one of the most devastating things a human being can experience. The question this documentary is asking, the question that has quietly been circulating and building, is this: what is the connection between these two women? And why does it matter so much? That answer is coming. But first, you need to understand what each of them has survived. Let's start with Nancy. Nancy Guthrie is not Savannah's sister. She is not her mother. The connection between them is not one of blood in the traditional sense, and that, in many ways, makes the story more fascinating, not less. Because what links these two women is something far more layered. It is grief. It is faith. It is the particular kind of resilience that gets forged not in success, but in loss. Nancy Guthrie and her husband David lost their daughter, Hope, in 1999. Hope lived for 199 days. She was born with a rare metabolic disorder called Zellweger syndrome, a condition that affects the brain and the nervous system and leaves almost no room for survival. Nancy and David knew before Hope was born that their daughter would not live long. They chose to carry her anyway. They chose to love her fully, knowing the end was already written. And then, devastatingly, it happened again. Their son Gabriel was born in 2001, and he too had Zellweger syndrome. Gabriel lived for 183 days, 2 children, 2 losses, back to back, the kind of grief that doesn't have language, the kind that hollows you out and leaves you standing in a life that looks the same from the outside, but feels entirely unrecognizable from within. Most people, facing that, would go silent, would retreat, would disappear into the private devastation of it all. Nancy Guthrie did not disappear. Instead, Nancy Guthrie did something extraordinary. She turned toward her grief instead of away from it. She began writing. She began speaking. She began teaching the Bible with a raw honesty that stunned the people who heard her. Because she wasn't teaching from a place of having all the answers. She was teaching from the exact center of her questions. Her first book, Holding On to Hope, was written in the aftermath of losing hope. It was not a book about having faith make things easier. It was a book about what faith looks like when things are impossibly hard. It resonated with readers in a way that surprised even Nancy herself, because grief, it turns out, is one of the most universal human experiences, and people who are grieving are desperate for someone who will sit with them in it honestly, without flinching and without false comfort. Nancy went on to write more books. She founded Grief Share. She began hosting retreats for pastors and their spouses who had lost children. She built an entire ministry, not from triumph, but from the rubble of her worst days. And this is where the story of Nancy Guthrie and the story of Savannah Guthrie begin to find their resonance with each other. Because Savannah, too, knows something about standing in the middle of a storm and not letting it break you on camera. Even when it's breaking you everywhere else, Savannah Guthrie has been remarkably open, for a woman of her public stature, about the battles she has fought privately. In 2016, she began losing vision in her right eye. The condition was the result of a retinal detachment, a medical emergency that required surgery and carried with it the very real possibility of permanent blindness. For a woman whose entire career depends on showing up in front of cameras, on reading teleprompters, on maintaining the kind of professional presence that leaves no room for uncertainty. This was terrifying. She said in interviews that there were moments where she genuinely didn't know if she would be able to continue her career. She said that she cried, that she was scared, that she had to confront, in a very visceral way, the fragility of the life she had so carefully built. And then, in 2017, the retinal detachment affected her other eye. The fear became even more acute. Surgeries followed. Recovery followed. And through all of it, Savannah showed up. She showed up to the desk. She showed up for her children. She and her husband, Mike Feldman, have 2 children, Vale and Charlie. She showed up for her audience, even when showing up cost her more than they will ever know. That kind of resilience, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but simply keeps moving, is something both Savannah and Nancy Guthrie seem to carry deep in their bones. But here's where the revelation takes a more specific shape. The name Guthrie is not common. And when do women carrying that same name, one a television anchor of extraordinary reach, the other a grief speaker and Bible teacher of remarkable depth, begin circulating in the same cultural conversation, people start asking questions. They start drawing lines. They start wondering about the nature of coincidence and connection. What researchers and fans and followers have pieced together is that the Guthrie family tree, the faith backgrounds, the geographic threads, they are more intertwined than either woman has made a point of broadcasting. And while neither Savannah nor Nancy has sat down for a joint interview to map out the exact coordinates of their connection, what is clear is that the values animating both of their lives are strikingly, almost eerily parallel. Faith, resilience, the refusal to let grief be the last word, The commitment to show up, on camera, on stage. In life, even when showing up is the hardest thing in the room, there's something deeply moving about two women carrying the same last name, carrying very different but equally profound burdens, and responding to those burdens with the same fundamental posture, forward, always forward. To understand why this particular revelation is landing with such force in the cultural conversation right now, you have to understand the moment we're living in. People are exhausted. They are quietly devastated by losses that didn't make the news, job losses, relationship losses, health crises, grief that arrived without warning and stayed without invitation. And in that kind of collective weariness, people are desperately searching for stories that do not lie to them, stories that do not package struggle into a tidy triumph arc and call it inspiration. Nancy Guthrie's story refuses to do that. She never claimed that faith made her children's deaths make sense. She never packaged her grief into a marketable victory. She sat with the unbearable and said, "This is what it looks like. This is what I found in the rubble." And she let people come and sit in that rubble with her. Savannah Guthrie's story, in its own way, does something similar. She has never pretended that the vision loss was just a bump in the road. She has never performed ease when ease was not there. She has spoken honestly, in her careful and measured way, about what it means to face uncertainty in a very public life, about what it means to hold your work and your family and your fear all at the same time, and keep walking. And now, with both of their stories circulating in the same cultural airspace, with people connecting dots and asking questions and sitting with the remarkable parallel of these two lives, something unexpected is happening. People are finding themselves in the Guthrie story, not because they are television anchors, not because they have lost children, but because they recognize, in both of these women, something that feels profoundly true about their own lives, the experience of carrying something heavy and not being able to put it down, the experience of showing up anyway, the experience of looking for meaning in places where meaning does not come easily or cheaply. The revelation at the heart of this documentary is not a scandal. It never was. What it is, what it has quietly been building toward, since the first moment someone looked at these two women and saw the thread connecting them, is a story about the kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside, the kind that wears a blazer and reads the news, the kind that stands at a podium and speaks about dead children with a steady voice, the kind that most of us are practicing in our own lives without ever realizing it has a name. In 2015, Savannah Guthrie spoke publicly about her faith in a way that surprised some of her viewers and moved others to tears. She described herself as someone who had come to faith not casually but deliberately, someone who had examined it and chosen it, not inherited it without thought. She spoke about prayer, about the grounding that her spiritual life provided in the midst of a career that could otherwise consume everything. This was not a small thing to say in the context of mainstream American media. It was a moment of genuine vulnerability from a woman whose public persona is built on precision and professionalism. And for the people who knew Nancy Guthrie's work, who had sat with her books in their darkest hours, who had listened to her speak about faith not as an easy answer, but as a difficult and honest companion, that moment carried an additional, almost electric resonance. Here were two women named Guthrie, two women who had stood in the fire, and both of them, in their own language and their own register, pointing toward the same thing. Not certainty, not ease, but presence, the willingness to be present in the hard thing, and to keep choosing to live forward from it. The arc of both of these lives carries within it something the world does not reward loudly or quickly, and that is faithfulness. Not the flashy kind, not the kind that produces viral moments or wins awards in its first season. The long, quiet, daily kind that accumulates over years and decades into something that only becomes visible when you step back far enough to see the whole shape of it. Nancy Guthrie has been showing up for grieving people for over 2 decades. She has sat across from strangers and held space for the worst thing that ever happened to them. She has written words in the small hours of difficult nights that have reached people she will never meet and held them together in moments she will never know about. That is a legacy that does not trend, but it endures. Savannah Guthrie has shown up to that desk for years, through political upheaval and personal crisis and a global pandemic, and the quiet terror of not knowing whether she would be able to see. She has been present for the American morning in a way that is easy to take for granted, because she makes it look effortless. But nothing about it has been effortless, and the fact that she has made it look that way, that is its own form of art, and its own form of service. When you hold these two stories next to each other, what you see is not coincidence. What you see is character. There's a reason this story is finding you right now. Maybe you're in a season where showing up feels like the hardest thing you've ever been asked to do. Maybe you've lost something or someone that doesn't make sense to lose. Maybe you've been watching people around you move forward and wondering why you feel like you're standing still. The Guthrie story, both of them together, is a quiet reminder that the most profound resilience is rarely the loudest, that the people who change the world often do it in ways that don't trend, that grief and faith and courage can coexist without resolution, without a clean ending, without the comfort of everything making sense. Nancy Guthrie never got her children back. Savannah Guthrie never got back the years of fear that medical uncertainty stole from her peace of mind. But both of them kept going. Both of them kept building. Both of them kept showing up for the people who needed them. That's the revelation. Not a scandal, not a secret, a truth hiding in plain sight about what human beings are capable of when they choose presence over retreat. If this story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment about what it brought up for you. And subscribe, because the stories worth telling are rarely the ones that shout the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones that whisper just long enough for you to finally hear them.